Have you ever imagined diving into a year like 1976, when progressive rock was at the peak of its creativity, but already feeling the blow from the punk wave that was coming to tear everything down, and discovering albums that captured the pure essences of that era? Albums that few have heard, but that carry a vital force that still echoes for those brave enough to dig into the musical past without filters or fads. Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore here, unearthing 5 prog rock records that came out in that turbulent year, works that didn't become stadium anthems or soundtracks for lazy generations, but that, in their obscurity, hold a raw authenticity and a depth that the giants of the genre would envy. As a historian who has spent decades rummaging through dusty archives of magazines like Melody Maker, Circus and Cream, and talking to musicians who lived through that madness, I'll guide you through these treasures, explaining not just what makes them exceptional, but why they stayed in the shadows, and how that makes them even more valuable for anyone seeking something real, without the commercial polish that ruins so many good things. Get ready for a journey that will make you question why the hell you're still wasting time on the same repetitive playlists. These albums are invitations to rediscover prog as it was, ambitious, imperfect, but always visceral. Let's start by contextualizing 1976 in progressive rock, because without that, these albums seem like ghosts floating in a vacuum. That year marked a brutal turning point. Prog, which had exploded in the early years of the decade with bands like Yes, Genesis, and King Crimson setting the rules for complexity and experimentation, was starting to feel the weight of its own grandeur. Critics, tired of endless solos and megalomaniacal concepts, were already smelling blood, and punk, with its raw simplicity, was about to explode in 1977 like a homemade bomb. But in 1976, there was still room for innovation, especially for bands that weren't on the radar of big labels, or that came from marginal scenes. These obscure albums emerged in that limbo. They captured the spirit of prog, symphonic, conceptual, technical, but without the hype that propelled the big names. Why? Because the market was merciless. If you didn't have a radio hit or $1 million tour, you fell into oblivion. And let's be straightforward. Many of these records were too bold for the casual listener, who preferred something chewable like the emerging pop rock. But for those who dive into them, there's an emotional reward that goes beyond nostalgia. It's like finding a vein of gold in an abandoned mine, something that makes you feel alive, connected to an era when music still risked everything. Think about the economic context. The recession after the 1973 oil shock left labels cautious, prioritizing safe bets, while the public, exhausted from years of excess, started craving something rawer. It was in this cauldron that smaller bands flourished, creating works that, without the pressure of success, could be purely artistic, full of imperfections that make them human and relatable. Let's take the first example, the self-titled album by Starcastle, released in February 1976 by Epic Records. This band from St. Louis, Missouri, was made up of musicians who grew up idolizing Yes, but who brought a more direct American edge, less ethereal. Gary Strader on bass, Herb Schilt on keyboards, Steven Tassler on drums, Matt Stewart on guitar, Stephen Hagler on guitar, and Terry Luttrell on vocals, a team that formed in the late 60s, playing covers in dingy bars before composing original material. The record opens with Lady of the Lake, a 10-minute track that sets the tone, a guitar riff that evokes distant mountains, followed by layers of mellotron that build a symphonic atmosphere, but with an urgency that Yes rarely achieved. Luttrell admitted they were labeled as Yes clones, but countered by saying they took that influence and made it their own, adding a rock and roll groove that the Brits lacked, and he's right. Listen to Elliptical Seasons, with its time changes that flow like a wild river, and you feel a raw energy, almost desperate, as if the band knew they had only one shot to impress. What makes this album great, despite its obscurity? Its accessibility disguised as complexity. While British prog sometimes sounded like a composition class for intellectuals, Starcastle delivered pure emotion. Guitar solos that cut like knives, vocal harmonies that lift the spirit. Guitarist Strater revealed they recorded the disc in cheap studios without endless overdubs, which gave it an honesty missing from polished productions. Few know it because the album sold modestly, overshadowed by releases like Rush's 2112. But for those who discover it, it's a revelation. Proof that American prog could be as innovative as the European kind, without pretensions. Imagine sitting in a damp basement in 1976, with friends smoking and listening to Sunfield, that track that mixes acoustic folk with electric explosions. That's where the magic happens. An emotional connection that makes you think about how much we've lost with the standardization of music today. Let's delve deeper into each track to better understand this dynamic. Lady of the Lake isn't just an opener. It builds a mythical narrative, inspired by Arthurian legends, but with an American twist where the hero is an ordinary worker seeking redemption, reflected in Luttrell's passionate vocals that rise and fall like waves on a restless lake. The transition to elliptical seasons introduces a cycle of seasons symbolizing the passage of time, with Schilt's keyboards painting images of golden autumns and relentless winters, while Tassler's drums keep a pulse that avoids chaos, holding everything together. Then Forces picks up the pace with dual guitars from Strater and Stewart intertwining in duels that recall the Allman Brothers, but with a progressive layer of synthesizers adding cosmic depth. It's in this track that Strater's bass shines, anchoring the instrumental wanderings in a solid groove, making it perfect for live shows, where the band extended the jams beyond studio limits. Nova brings a more reflective moment, with vocal harmonies evoking the Beach Boys in a prog context, speaking of stellar rebirth, a metaphor for the band's own career, struggling to emerge from the shadows. And closing with True to the Light, the album culminates in an explosion of optimism, with solos that defy gravity, leaving the listener with a sense of empowerment. What makes all this special is how Starcastle balanced influence and originality. They didn't copy Yes blindly, but filtered it through their Midwestern American experiences, where rock was played in garages and backyard parties, not European palaces. Critics at the time noted this freshness, but the timing was cruel. 1976 saw prog being attacked as elitist, and an American band without a British accent was seen as secondary. However, for modern listeners, this disc is an antidote to sameness, encouraging exploration beyond the classics, feeling the pulse of an era in transition, where music still had soul without being pasteurized. Moving on to Horselips and their The Book of Invasions, a Celtic Symphony, released in November 1976 by DJM Records. This Irish band, Charles O'Connor on fiddle and mandolin, Jim Lockhart on keyboards, Johnny Feen on guitar, Barry Devlin on bass, and Eamon Carr on drums, came from a Celtic folk tradition, but injected progressive rock to create something hybrid and fierce. The album is based on the Lebor Gabala Érenn, the medieval book of Ireland's invasions, divided into 3 movements: Jean Tre, joyful songs; Gol Tre, sad songs; and Swan Tre, lullabies. It starts with Daybreak, an instrumental that evokes ancient dawns with flutes and intertwined guitars, leading to March into Trouble, where the martial rhythm simulates ancestral battles. Devlin explained that they wanted to marry Irish myth with modern sound, without romanticizing. The real Ireland is harsh, full of blood and loss, and their music reflects that. It's great because it captures the essence of prog as epic narrative, but with cultural roots that make it unique. The Celtic melodies add a melancholy that English prog rarely touched, like in The Power and the Glory, with its fiddle solo that tears at the soul. Obscure because the British and American markets favored English bands, and Horselips was seen as folk rock in disguise. But fan testimonials highlight how the album inspired a generation of Irish musicians to mix tradition and innovation. Listening to Warm Sweet Breath of Love is feeling the weight of history, a motivation to explore your own roots without fear of being labeled dated. To expand, let's dissect the conceptual structure. The first movement, Jantre, is a celebration of arrivals, with Trouble with a capital T, bringing a guitar riff from Feen that pulses like a warrior's heart, mixed with O'Connor's fiddle dancing like flames in a Celtic bonfire. It's a track that builds tension gradually, using time changes to represent the chaos of invasions, culminating in a chorus that unites voices in unison, evoking tribal unity. Moving to Goltry, the sad movement, The Rights of Man is an instrumental lament, with Lockhart's keyboards creating layers of mist, while Devlin's bass provides a somber pulse, reflecting Ireland's historical losses. Think of the famines and rebellions that shaped the nation. Here the band doesn't hesitate to incorporate traditional elements like the bodhran, played by Carr, adding primitive percussion that contrasts with electric effects, creating a sound that's both ancestral and futuristic. Dearg Doom is the standout, an explosion of energy with guitars galloping like horses in battle, and vocals narrating legends of fallen heroes, inspired by mythical figures like Cu Chulainn. In Suantry, the lullaby movement, Ride to Hell closes the cycle with a deceptive calm, where soft melodies mask underlying tension, symbolizing the eternal cycle of conflict and peace. What elevates this album is its fidelity to cultural heritage without falling into kitsch. Horslips lived the Ireland of the 70s, marked by tensions in the north, and injected that reality into the music, making it relevant and poignant. Compared to albums like Genesis's The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which was conceptual but abstract, The Book of Invasions is rooted in real history, giving it an authenticity that resonates emotionally. The obscurity came from geographic isolation. Ireland wasn't the center of rock, but that preserved its purity, allowing listeners to discover a prog that goes beyond entertainment, touching on themes of identity and resistance that still inspire today, encouraging the valuing of marginal narratives in a world dominated by mainstream ones. Now, John Anderson's solo album, Olias of Sun Hillow, released in July 1976 by Atlantic. Anderson, Yes's vocalist, decided to record everything alone. He composed, played over 30 instruments from harp to sitar, creating a concept about a mystical journey of an alien people. The disc opens with Ocean Song, a layer of ethereal voices over tribal percussion, evolving into Meeting, Garden of Gaeta, where synthesizers paint cosmic landscapes. Anderson described the process as a 3-month madness, like going to music school without breathing, isolated in my studio, letting inspiration flow without filters. What makes it exceptional? Its visionary purity. It's prog at its most intimate, without a band to dilute the vision, with harmonies that elevate the listener to altered states. Few know it because it was overshadowed by solos from other Yes members, but critics noted its influence on New Age and ambient. Flight of the Moorglade is an emotional peak, with vocals conveying hope amid chaos, a realistic lesson that solitary creativity can be more powerful than forced collaborations. Expanding, the concept is a space odyssey. Olias, the architect, builds a ship to save his people, symbolized in tracks like Solid Space, where layers of harp and keyboard create a cosmic void, filled by Anderson's multifaceted vocals echoing like echoes in an infinite universe. Dance of Ranyart introduces tribal rhythms, with handmade percussion that Anderson created using everyday objects, adding an organic texture that contrasts with the electronics, representing the union of primitive and advanced. Kokwak and Transic is a vocal mantra, overlaid in loops that hypnotize, inspired by meditations Anderson practiced, turning the track into a tool for introspection. Neon accelerates with sitar and flutes, evoking interstellar travels, while To the Runner closes with optimistic serenity, harmonies suggesting arrival at a new home. This album highlights Anderson's versatility, who, free from Yes's dynamics, explored spirituality without constraints, influenced by science fiction readings and Eastern philosophies. Compared to Tales from Topographic Oceans, it's more accessible, less bombastic, allowing a personal connection that collective prog sometimes loses. Its obscurity stems from the focus on solos by Rick Wakeman or Steve Howe, but that makes it a treasure for those seeking individual inspiration, motivating creation without depending on others in an era where collaboration is overrated. The 801 with 801 Live, recorded in September 1976 and released by Island, is a special case, a temporary supergroup with Phil Manzanera, Roxy Music, Brian Eno, Bill McCormick, Simon Phillips, Francis Monkman, and Lloyd Watson. A recording of a unique show at the Queen Elizabeth Hall. It mixes originals with covers like the Beatles' Tomorrow Never Knows. It opens with Lagrima, an atmospheric instrumental, leading to TNK with Eno's vocals sounding like dystopian prophecies. Richard Williams praised the intensity where almost anything is possible, highlighting the rhythm section. Great for capturing prog in transition to the experimental, with improvisations that challenge conventions. Obscure because it was an ephemeral project, but Manzanera's testimonials reveal how it influenced post-punk. Third Uncle is a hurricane of energy, motivating experimentation without fear of failure. To delve deeper, the show was an elevated jam session, with the true wheel mixing funk with noise, Phillips's drums pulsing like an industrial engine, while Eno adds vocal textures that distort reality. Babies on Fire is reimagined with Manzanera's guitars cutting like lasers, and Miss Shapiro brings complex harmonies fusing glam and prog. The Kinks' You Really Got Me is transformed into an improvised suite, showing how 801 deconstructed classics. This album captures the spirit of 1976 as a bridge to new wave, with Eno already pointing toward ambient. Its ephemerality kept it obscure, but it's a lesson in transient collaboration, inspiring short and intense projects. Finally, Pulsar with The Strands of the Future, released in 1976 by Decca. French band, Victor Bosch on drums, Gilbert Gondel on guitar, Jacques Roman on keyboards, Roland Richard on sax, and Michel Masson on bass, creates space prog influenced by Pink Floyd, but with French symphonic touches. The title track, 22 minutes long, is a cosmic suite with mellotron and floating guitars. Roman spoke of the spatial refinement they sought, without amateur production. Exceptional for its immersion, creating sonic worlds that English prog would envy. Obscure for being French in an Anglo-centric market, but its emotional urgency in Fool's Failure motivates exploring beyond the obvious. Expanding, The Strands of the Future divides into parts exploring time and destiny, with Richard's sax adding jazz, while Roman's keyboards build sonic nebulae. Flight is ethereal with Gandel's guitars echoing like distant stars. Windows brings tribal percussion, and Fool's Failure closes with prophetic tension. Pulsar incorporates French elegance compared to Wish You Were Here, but more introspective. Its obscurity preserves its mystique, encouraging personal discoveries. These albums, in their obscurity, remind us that true prog was about risk, not success. Dive into them and feel the impact. That's what makes music eternal. Now let's delve even deeper into the historical context to understand why 1976 was pivotal. Progressive rock emerged in the 60s as a reaction to simple pop, inspired by classics and jazz. But in 1976, it faced criticism for excess. Bands like Starcastle represented the democratization of the genre, taking it beyond Europe. Horselips added cultural diversity, challenging Eurocentrism. Anderson showed solo potential, 801 ephemerality, and Pulsar continental innovation. Each reflects struggles, labels cutting budgets, audiences migrating to disco and punk. But their greatness lies in resilience, in the ability to move without concessions. For those who listen today, it's a call to action. Rescue these records, play them loud, feel the vibration that digitized music has lost. Think of Starcastle's modest tours, playing in clubs packed with enthusiasts, contrasting with Yes's mega shows, or Anderson's home studios, where solitude bred genius. That's the essence, music as pure expression, not product. Expanding on influences, Starcastle drew from Yes's Close to the Edge, but added American blues, making Lady of the Lake a transatlantic bridge. Horselips fused Jethro Tull with Irish folklore, creating hybridism that anticipated world music. Anderson echoed Fragile, but with deeper spirituality. 801 mixed Roxy music with experimental Beatles, paving the way for Talking Heads. Pulsar dialogued with Floyd, but with Gallic refinement. Their obscurity. Saturated market, but that saves them from wear. Listen and feel the motivation to create, to challenge norms. In 1976, Prog was dying and being reborn. These albums are the forgotten rebirth, waiting for you.